Hi, how you doing? I wanted to talk to you today, especially to the new gun owners that have been buying guns, give you a few tips about firearms. The first one I wanted to talk to you about are the safety rules. There's many safety rules, but there's four main ones that you need to keep aware of. The first one is to keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot. So what that means is you want to keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to pull the trigger. You've got your sights lined up, you've got your target lined up. And the second thing to go with that is you need to make sure you know what your target is when you're shooting it and what's behind it. If you're shooting at something and it's on a hill and you're shooting up the hill, and if you miss the target or if it goes through the target and the bullet goes over the top of the hill, that's not safe. So you want to make sure you have a backstop or something like that, so that if it goes over or under or through your intended target, that it doesn't hit somebody or something you don't want to hit, for obvious reasons. You don't want to ever point your gun at anything that you don't want to destroy. So whether that be on purpose or by mistake, what happens a lot of times is new gun owners will kind of move their guns around and what we call flag other people. So by accident, usually you always want to keep your firearm pointed in a safe direction so that you don't do that. And you always want to treat your firearms as if they're loaded. Make sure that you don't point it at somebody and say, oh, it's not loaded, and pull the trigger, because a lot of firearms have gone off and a lot of people have been seriously hurt and killed because the firearm was unloaded. So always treat firearms as if they're loaded. There are a number of other safety rules, and you can search online for them or go to the NRA, and they have safety rules that you can see. For example, wearing eye and ear protection. But those first four are the main ones that keep you safe. And if there's a mistake made with one of those, most likely, if you're following them all, no one's going to get hurt. So I'm not saying to break any of those, but for instance, one time I had a firearm. It was a single action firearm, which means you have to pull the trigger and drop the hammer to get the gun so that it's safe. And I made sure I was pointing it in the right direction, but as I let go of the hammer, it slipped and it fired. If I had had it pointed at somebody, then we would have been in a lot of trouble. I would have hurt somebody. But because I was following the other rules, it was just a little bit embarrassing, and it made me realize and take a little more care about when I'm shooting things. So what I wanted to do really quickly is just kind of go over two popular firearms and just kind of show you some basic stuff on how to handle them and some of the differences. So one of the most popular firearms is a Glock, and this particular one is the Glock 17. So it's in a caliber called 9mm, and as you can see, it's unloaded, and at least you want to double check that it's unloaded. There's no magazine in there, so this is very most likely safe, but you still want to treat it like it's loaded. So even if it's like this, I don't want to point it at anybody, okay? So you just double check and make sure. Now, when somebody hands you a firearm, you want to always check it to make sure that it's unloaded. And before you hand a firearm to somebody, you check it as well. So you're both checking it to make sure it's unloaded. For this particular firearm, you pull the slide back, and I'm left-handed, so I have a hard time locking it this way, but you just lock it open and you kind of look at it. So I'm used to doing it this way, which makes it a lot easier, but in order for me to do that when I'm shooting, I have to switch hands. So you want to be able to shoot depending on what is your dominant eye. And you can look online to see what your dominant eye is. And sometimes you're right-handed, but your dominant eye is your left eye. So if you've never shot before, it might be a good idea to actually learn to shoot with your dominant eye, even if it's opposite of what your handed is. So this is a very popular gun that law enforcement has used for a lot of years. It's called semi-automatic, so every time you pull the trigger, a round fires. And if you notice, there's no external safeties, and I'll be showing you another one soon that has a lot of safeties so that you can see the difference. But what this does have, it has a drop safety so that if you drop the gun, it's not going to fire. A lot of older guns, when you drop them, if they hit on the hammer or hit just right, they would fire, and then if you were around or somebody else, they could hit you, so it was really dangerous. But with the Glock, they came out with this little bar here on the trigger, so you actually have to be pulling the trigger to release that safety. If it gets caught on something on the outside, without pulling that little lever, the gun's not going to fire. So that was a really, really neat invention that was put on Glocks that a lot of other manufacturers are using now. Okay, so that's a Glock 17. Now, this is a 1911, okay? It's called 1911 because John Moses Browning invented it, and it was put into service in 1911. As you can see, there's no magazine in there. There's no bullet in there, and I like to put my finger in there, make sure that there's no round in there, just to make sure. So with this particular gun, it is called a single action gun. So what that means is you pull the trigger and the hammer falls. So one of the things you can do, so you don't make the same mistake that I was talking about earlier when I pull a trigger and pull it wrong and have this hit, is you can just put your finger there on the hammer, pull the trigger, and just slowly drop it. Now I wouldn't recommend a new user for this gun, just because there's doing that you can slip, but if you have somebody that can teach you how to do that, then that's great. So this particular firearm has a number of safeties. It has what they call a thumb safety, okay, which is this thing here. And what that does is when it's up, you can't pull the trigger. It stops the trigger, but it also stops you from doing anything. It locks up the slide as well. So that's the thumb safety. And because I'm left-handed, I have one on both sides. It's called an ambidextrous safety, but the original design only had it on one side. There's also on this 1911 a grip safety, okay? So in order for it to go off, you have to grip it tight. Now all this might sound like a good idea to have all these safeties, but personally, if I have a self-defense situation, if you're having a gun for self-defense, you want to make sure that, I'm just going to make that safe here. You want to make sure that when you pull the trigger, it goes bang. And if you have too many safeties, unless you train a lot, you might not be able to get the gun to go bang. The worst sound to hear is a bang when you want it to go click, and a click when you want it to go bang. So make sure you know how to use your firearm. And if you're not going to practice with it, you're just going to kind of keep it around, I would suggest getting a revolver, which I'll show you in another video, because it is really simple to use, and there's not a lot of hard things to manipulate it. But I hope that answers some of your questions that you have, and at least get you a little bit of familiarity with your gun. I would suggest strongly that you read your manual that came with your gun from front to back, because every gun has a little bit of something a little bit different ways to clean it, just depending on what it is. And if you got it used and there's no manual, then you can download most of them online. So I hope you guys have fun, and welcome to the club. Shooting's really fun, and it can give you a great sense of confidence when you're in a self-defense situation, and just it's fun to plink. So shooting at targets is great. Have a great day.